ladies and gentlemen. Well, welcome to this controversial session about fashion, whether it creates bonds and links. So we have the delight to have with us a true European. We have Anushka Borghese. She has a German mum. Yes, I'm starting again because the microphone wasn't up to my mouth. Yes, we have Anushka with us. She was born in London. Her mum is German. Her dad is Italian. And she has carried out a lot of her career with Yves Saint Laurent in Paris. She was Director of Communication for Europe. And now she is World Director for Media and Public Relations at Giorgio Armani. So everyone knows who Giorgio Armani is. So alongside Anushka, we've got Pascal Morand, Executive President of the Haute Couture and Fashion Federation here in France. He also has another career. At the same time, he is also an economics professor. I met him when I was just a young girl. We studied economics together. So, does fashion create bonds? Well, of course it does. Cultural links and bonds. We see that during the fashion shows. We see it at Fashion Week. Economic links as well, because it is an economic activity. It's a business. And particularly thriving business here in Paris, part of the CAC 40. And it also creates sociological links because it can occasionally enable people feel they belong to a community. One could even add, if we want to do a bit of dark humor here, some political links, because there was one law which was voted in unanimously, 14th of March last. It was a draft law about pop-up fashion or fast fashion. So fashion can bring people together, make them agree about something, despite the fact that it itself is fleeting. So fashion suffers some controversies. And my first question to my panelists is fashion inclusive or is it exclusive? I'm thinking of luxury fashion, haute couture. We see that most people can't afford it. So are we inclusive or exclusive? Anushka. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. I've slipped away from Milan to be here for a couple of days. So fashion, I would say that the answer is between both of them. I cannot deny that it can be exclusive. It excludes people because prices can be very, very high. We see that during the fashion shows. Although we like to say that we have we're giving people wage increases to be more democratic, but it doesn't really reach haute couture. Not when you're talking about the most luxurious items. However, more recently, it's becoming more inclusive, I would say. Not only speaking from my own experience at Giorgio Armani, we are really at the very beginning. Giorgio Armani in '85, he decided to launch Emporio Armani. He wanted to speak to as many people as possible. He didn't only want to be addressing people with a certain revenue. He didn't want to only allow the rich to buy Armani. He wanted to create garments that were more inclusive. And then there was Armani Exchange, of course. You may be familiar with that. That's even more inclusive. But it's inclusive also for all people. We've got streaming for haute couture on social media. People can see what's going on in haute couture. And we have inclusion with sport, for example. There are going to be the Olympic Games in Paris this year. There are brands like LVMH have a partnership with the Olympic Games. They know that they can target a huge population. And it's the same for us. Armani has always had a sports line, and we also always try to be involved in sport to be as inclusive as possible. I'm going to hand the floor over to my fellow panel member. Yeah, I agree with what Anushka said. Yes, fashion can be so very inclusive. Let me explain what I mean. When we're talking about fashion, let's be clear about what we're talking about. There are different categories of fashion. It's like the ready-to-wear label. You can use ready-to-wear for Dior, created by Dior, or ready-to-wear clothes, which comes from the fast fashion channel. So it depends what you're talking about. And then the very heart of the fashion system is there, but it covers all kinds of sectors with a wide range of prices also from one brand to the next. So in a nutshell, what I'd like to say about these different points to do with inclusion is we've got this perception, and fashion clothes are a symbol. We know this. I'd just like to mention, to quote Balzac, and talking about the hieroglyphs and fashion, which is a type of communication. There are other things to be mentioned. The fact that when you're talking about designer labels, you've got a range of prices. There are links around the globe, very, very strong links for all kinds of people. Just take a look at how a studio is made up, for example. You can see the artistic director and see the artistic community of a town or city, which comes together, and fashion can play a leading role. And, of course, there's the notion of a community. And perhaps I could say a bit more about that. Just take a look at the number of followers on social networks. There are amazing figures. Fashion is not the only case in hand. There's film and there's music as well. But fashion really is in the leading line there. Let me give you a bit of a story here. One day, I was going to the Minister of Finance in France on the River Seine. I was on the 6th floor, and I was wearing some Off-White trainers. Off-White is a brand which was founded by Virgil, who then became director of the men's line at Louis Vuitton. And there was a manager there on the 6th floor who came to see me. One came to see me, and the fact that I was wearing these trainers by Off-White meant that we belonged to the same community, because obviously he was wearing similar shoes. So he started to talk to me. We talked about Virgil Abloh, and he said that, you know, Virgil has inspired us all. And so it's all about inspiration, a community, thanks to creation and imagination, and through this paradigm of the style that is inherent in each fashion designer or artistic director. So, Pascal, given what you've just said, if that creates communitarianism, that doesn't create links, that creates exclusion. No, but it's a very open communitarianism. It's a community of rituals. It's extremely open and very well respected. It's full of respect and diversity. I'm not saying this because Anushka's here, but we all respect Mr. Armani and everything that he's done, everything he represents. But there's also a lot of respect for all creators when they get together, all of them, well, in fashion and beyond, all of those people who breathe life into these things, everyone who understands the present moment in time, and many of them who can anticipate the future, as other artists can do in other fields. So let's move on to the second question. Is fashion international or local? Well, we have the economists will say that there's a value chain which is international. However, there seems to be a trend to producing more locally. We like clothes that are made in France or made in Italy, and it really has a strong message. So what would one say about that? Is fashion international, global, or is it local? Well, the first thing I'd like to say is to talk about this dualism in marketism. You've got marketing is talking to the consumer and to the creators. So we're marketing an offering rather than marketing supply rather than demand. So marketing can be very, very basic. At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to design globally but offer locally, whereas it can be the other way around. But the main principle is to have an identity that has been designed locally, which engages with global codes, so that once again for luxury brands, so you can have an echo. And that is really what it's all about. And that's the reason why, when you're talking about a medium or top range brand, export figures are kind of limited, whereas in other cases you will export 90% or more. What about you, Anushka? Yes, of course it's global, but it's becoming increasingly local. Mr. Armani at the head office is at the head office in Milan, and he hardly ever leaves the office, in fact. But most of the production is in Italy. But we know, for reasons which I've already mentioned, when we created Emporio Armani and Armani Exchange, we wanted to have lower prices, and that meant that we could no longer produce only in Italy. We had to produce elsewhere, but there are very good solutions elsewhere, not only in Italy. And we've continued to grow. Next year, the brand will have been around for 50 years. And so we are still independent, despite all of these big luxury groups which are becoming more and more competitive, because we've got our markets which we have developed outside Italy. Italy remains our biggest market. It's important to underline that. Italy is where we have our highest sales figures in Europe. We've got other great markets such as France. We're happy that we're so successful in France, but in the rest of the world we are present. Mr. Armani was one of the first to go out to China. 25 years ago, he's really respected, but we have tried to use markets. We've wanted to have slow growth, careful growth, global growth. For fashion and designer brands, production is in Italy a lot, mostly some in France and a lot in Europe, Eastern and Central Europe. But we also see, for ecological reasons, that we want to have this local identity, and the whole challenge for such brands is to be able to have a business model which is long-lasting and will withstand competition from major players in the fast fashion section. So that leads me on to my next question, which could be a rather unpleasant question. Is fashion negative for the environment? Does it drive people to overconsume? How would you deal with that? Who wants to kick off? Of course, we know that we do not need all of these garments today. We do not need all of these collections. But fashion is one of the industries which pollutes the most. But we're trying to clean up our act. And Mr. Armani has always believed in long-lasting fashion. If we do things with this in mind, make sure that our garments are of top quality, we can pass things on to our next generations, items that are timeless. Mr. Armani, of course, will follow trends and seasons, but fashion can help. We just have to be very careful, always, to do fewer collections and to be more careful in your production. During the pandemic, Mr. Armani wrote a letter saying that the seasons really have to be respected, and you mustn't prepare your collection 6 months upstream of the season. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We're trying to work on that. I would say that clothing brands brands such as Armani and others, Jack Muse and Omami, all of these younger brands that are working very, very well, are very successful. If you take a look at how their prices have evolved on the second-hand market, the prices can go down, but they are rather stable when you compare with other categories of goods. There is a structural problem with fashion. It's an environmental problem. You've got one crazy idea. It's a lie which has been repeated time and time again, and that makes it become truth, as Confucius would say. And it is said that it's the second most polluting sector or industry. And that has become a kind of a mantra. People believe that. If there was a ranking, it would be, I think, 4th or 5th, which is already a serious problem. But when you're talking about pollution and polluting the environment, that's one thing. But when you talk about impact on the environment, by definition in economic terms, there's a big problem of volume, and things aren't looking good on that front, because we've got this business model that can potentially aggravate the situation. So our annual production is about 100 billion, 120 billion garments per year. So that's a lot of clothing. And when you're looking at the haute couture end, it's like 1,000 times fewer pieces of clothing which are being produced. So there's a challenge here in terms of the different challenges and the scale, legitimacy of these databases. When you're measuring impacts, it can be very complex to do. You have to analyze the industrial process, and there are new models, of course. You talked about fast fashion. Today, there's ultra-fast fashion as well, with platforms such as Shine and Temu, which are offering dresses that cost just €5 or a coat for €10. And that means that demand today is directed at students. The students might prefer these brands to, say, Zara. So there's a lot of challenges here in terms of the volume of garments which are produced. The main problem is processing this question of volume. We really do have to work on that subject. But these luxury brands still have a role to play here. Their impact is relatively low, but they must set an example. And that's why they're carrying out so many projects. That's why they're working so hard on this score. Yes, you're making me think of a survey carried out in France not so long ago. Do you think that we are consuming too many garments here in France? And most people said yes. The next question was, do you think you have too many clothes in your wardrobe? And most of them said no. So there's a bit of an incoherence there. So we've got a few minutes left, but before I open the floor, I've got a question. Paris, Milan, cooperation or competition? Well, I'm part Italian, so I would say competition, because the Italians are noted for that. It's natural, isn't it? In each country, we're all patriotic, particularly fashion designers. I see this, as I said earlier on. I worked in Paris for 10 years. I've worked for French companies, and I've seen the difference between an Italian designer and a French one. But I must say that at Armani, fashion, it belongs to Paris, and I think Mr. Armani will probably believe that as well. And he presented his collections in Paris some years ago because it's a big challenge. Armani knows that Paris is beautiful. Milan is fabulous, despite the fact that it's an industrial city. And Milan is a beautiful city in its own way. And we're so very independent. We've got these couture houses which can be iconic, which are still owned by the founders. I work for one of them, Armani, but there are other examples: Prada, Dolce & Gabbana, Versace, Zegna, Cucinelli, etc., etc. So you've got some Fellini-style capitalism going there. But And it's for that reason that I can say that there is a lot of collaboration with Paris. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk about French fashion and Italian fashion. So there is a lot of cooperation. We know that we are different, and one will never be able to develop fashion if we don't work together. We're not islands. We're not lost out in a. We are connected. Yeah, France is known around the world, as is Italy. And France and Italy form a couple in the creative industries, and it's a vital couple. And just take a look at well, I can't list all the names, but all of the artistic directors. Look at the names of the top managers. Production is often in France, Italy, also in Portugal, particularly for knitwear. And then there's Fashion Week. Fashion Week has a huge impact. Our federation organizes it in Fashion Week in Paris, and we work very closely with the Italian body in charge of haute couture, etc. So we organize Fashion Weeks together. For Fashion Week in women's fashion in Paris, there are 2 for women, 2 for men, and 2 for haute couture, 2 weeks for haute couture. And Armani has its fashion shows for ready-to-wear in Milan, and it also exhibits in Paris. So there's a huge amount of media impact and media value. It's like the Super Bowl in the States, with celebrities attend. It's so very important both for Paris and for Milan. So I think over recent years we have strengthened our symbiosis. There have been some wonderful capital cities of fashion such as London and Paris. Is now Copenhagen, which is emerging, and Shanghai, for example, because all of these fashion weeks are very important for our brands, but there are some very close links, natural links. There's been one day dedicated to Made in France, and we're all involved in that. It's also very important for industrialization and re-industrializing our countries. And it's all tied in with European politics. So fashion creates links. Oh, yes. We have a few minutes remaining if anyone has a question. The microphone is on its way. Hello. I work in asset management. I work on Place Vendôme for a company which is also established in Milan, so I know both cities very well. I would like to say a couple of words and ask a question. I think fashion has always carried values of fairness and equality. Just think that Poiret was the one to thank that we're no longer wearing corsets, and then we have all these miniskirts that have made us more comfortable. It's good for equality. In all industries, we're always talking about ESG, including in fashion. We're building wind turbines and solar panels, etc. in other industries, but fashion is it pollutes a lot, and there's not a lot of governance. You've got all of these extraction of minerals in fashion. We know that there's fast fashion, and it's not ESG friendly because of the volumes you've already talked about. But as far as the fashion designers are concerned, and haute couture, what are the challenges that you must rise to in order to set an example and be exemplary? Is it about where you get your supplies from, or is it something else? Well, the value chain is so very important. We work on all of that, of course. Also, environmental performance. And I would say that the whole issue is the notion of being very coherent between ecological efforts, social efforts which are made by these brands, and also public policy standards in Europe. If you take a look at current standards, which are in France and in Europe on sustainability, this concept is very complex. And so in these databases you see in France and in Europe, European standards win, but there can be some very contradictory situations. So the whole challenge is to fairly assess everything that we need to do. You can have a really ecological, brilliant new brand, which is going to have a poor score according to the standards which have been drawn up. So it's all very technical. It's almost scientific, but it's a very important, and that's something which we're waging war on all the time. Well, I think sadly our time is up. We could have continued talking for hours. Well, we'll continue to talk once we leave the stage, of course. I would just like to wrap up by saying that Marnie says that we have to use common sense. We really have to use our common sense in everything, even in the fashion world. You have to use your common sense. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us. You have chosen a very good debate because if, like me, you have spent some time in the previous sessions, you have heard a lot of things regarding the company's role in the society. It's a very specific weekend. We're quite concerned. There's an elephant in the room this year, which is the political situation. And obviously, what I've been hearing since yesterday, there's a lot of reflection of the role of companies in society. Should we go further? That's not normally the role of companies to actually play an active role in the political realm, but something that they should go further in terms of participation to the debates of society, in terms of commitment for the society. There's also a deeper reflection in the midterm on the role of the companies, management of companies, and afterwards, after this period of uncertainties and instability, maybe there's a wake-up call. There's a strength of stability because it creates actually bonds. What we want to do with X is to build pathways and between worlds and universes, and maybe the aim is to overcome anger, conflicts, and combats. There's a new responsibility for companies nowadays. I will introduce the different panelists. We have a wonderful panel. I will start with Nathalie, which is on my far right. She's an economist from the Cercle des Économistes. She was in the University of Lille, and she will have the responsibility to set the scene for our debate in a few seconds. Next to her is Sophie Chassat. She's the president of Accuracy, which is an international firm of strategic advisory. She's also the author of a book called Élan Vital, and it's not without any link with our debate. It's regarding momentum and pulsions and everything that will actually trigger human beings. And we want to know more about it. Next to you, Céline Brucker from L'Oréal. She's been at L'Oréal since 2023. It's L'Oréal France. You're right. Yeah. It's already good, you know. You've had a long career within L'Oréal. You've been to the US, you've seen different cultural sensibilities, and it's nice to see this in the light of different cultural background. It has been a forerunner in terms of commitment, in terms of gender parity, in terms of commitment for the protection of the environment. So it's good to hear the vision of L'Oréal, of its commitment towards the society. Next to you, Pierre Ferracci, who's used to coming here. He's the chairman of the Alpha Group. Alpha is 900 people specialized in advisory and expertise in assisting companies, but also social partners, economic and socio-economic committees of companies. You have a very fine, sophisticated knowledge of the corporate world and the checks and balances within corporate world. You know that the company can represent a role model in this turmoil. Next to you, we have Stéphane Deveillant, who's the chairman of the board of La Banque Postale since 2003. And this is very interesting because we have a state-owned company with specific missions and roles, which is in its DNA, in its raison d'être. And we are curious to know what you have to say about the subject. Maya Noël, also, who's the general managing director of France Digital. That's a startup and investor in Europe. 2,000 members, and yourself, you've talked about gender equality and parity for quite some time. You've been part of the debate and the public debate, which we're going to talk about when we talk about liability of companies. Nathalie, the floor is yours to set the scene on the debate. You also have the opportunity and the right to speak up, to question our speakers, our guests. Seize this opportunity because it's not every day that you're going to have such a beautiful range of executive officers that will be accessible to you. It's also important for you as well. They need to listen to you, and during this period, you should actually ask the right questions. Thank you, Vincent. So we should see that our companies as undergoing important changes. We've talked about transition related to energy and protection of the environment, the digital revolution with the development of robots and AI, especially regenerative AI, the demographic shock with a longer life expectancy and simultaneously the drop in natality rate, the health crisis, the geopolitical crisis that have entailed a relocation of value chains and reindustrialization of the economy, and also institutional crisis, political crisis, such that we know them, that our country has known them. Today, at the eve of a second round of elections, and the outcome of which remains uncertain, and that corresponds to a fragmentation of society. As we have said it earlier, these important U-turns entail important changes, both for employees but also for companies at large. How will trades be impacted? How should we adjust skills throughout the entire career path? How can we adapt to these transformations without leaving anyone outside along the way? Young people, the elderly, the minorities coming from vulnerable groups. What are the economic consequences, but also the consequences on society after the election? And in a more tangible way, uncertainties are reinforcing the concerns of employees, and they correspond to some of the expectations of on their part, which are social demands towards the companies, their quests for purpose at work, the necessity to adapt their skills via long life learning, the looking for better acknowledgement and better remuneration for their work, and the necessity to develop virtuous behaviors in the face of climate change and to have more social inclusion, the need for social democracy in the face of a democracy that is more and more fragmented. And what is quite interesting is that in this context, facing these radical uncertainties, the corporate world continues to be a place where people can speak to one another, where one spends most of one's time, and where there is stability, which is therefore an environment that is reassuring, which is a source of safety, especially in this context. French people trust companies as a majority. May they be small or large, may they be state-owned or private companies. And we have seen over the last week a lot of things that got out of control, however. But can companies respond to these social demands? How can we reconcile a common project with the expectations of each and every one of us? Which strategy should we implement to respond to that? Which governance, which management policy should we set up? How can we reconcile these demands while keeping efficient and making sure that we have enough profit and yield? And do they have an interest in doing so? What about working with social partners as a potential means to respond to these needs? Should we go towards a new governance model? And then, to quote Philippe Val's words this morning, is it the right time to go towards a new form of capitalism? Oh, well, some of these statements are quite daunting. So you've published an article in L'Echo. We'll start with you because of the tone of this as well. If I'm not mistaken, your column says that facing the shock of dissolution with the possibility of having an extreme party afterwards, you think that the companies have a role to play, that they should go further. We could wonder, are we not asking too much from companies? And you say, well, basically, we need to reinforce models of common interest. I wonder what you mean by models of common interest. Something that weaves bonds between people, because the corporate world is capable of creating that. Can you explain that? Yes, it's actually quite ironical if you think about that, because we are the exact opposite. It's not going from individualism to common interest. It's actually the other way around. It's each for its own right now, as you have recalled. That's the show that we've seen with these elections. It's all about thinking for oneself. And against the backdrop of this political world, we can see that facing the danger of transition, it is difficult to find common interests. It's all about different interests. We have companies that suggest innovation in terms of business models, in terms of governance, that are for the common interest. Because what is at stake is not going from one category of interest to another. It's rather having a combination of diverging, of dissenting interests. And this is why we have a synthesis of private interest, of stakeholders, and general interest. A few examples to make things more concrete. When we choose a model of growth by volume and we'd rather have a model of growth by quality, this is a radical choice. There's a specialist of electric wires that decided to forego having more and more products and more and people to have a three-level change, an economic change, by focusing on products and customers that are more profitable, an environmental change by positioning themselves as a leader of energy transition worldwide, and by also renovating its social pact with its employees. The outcome of all this is to have a catalog of products that is divided by four times less clients. However, the economic return has tripled, and there's a decarbonation process and goals that have been met. So when we choose, so it's not going down on growth, it's a different growth, exactly. And another example, when we choose to sell use of products and not the products themselves, then we change the business model. We actually rent instead of selling. The customer pays for a monthly subscription to have access to a range of products. That happened with Decathlon in Belgium for circular economy. The outcome of this is that we have offers that are 3 to 6 times less expensive. We have a carbon footprint that is divided by 15, and we have a full-fledged example of circular economy. I'm interrupting you here because this is very interesting to open up the economy of circularity. We're no longer owners, we're renting out. That creates added value, obviously, and it has a very strong environmental impact, which is beneficial, but we're turning the tables here. We go from one model to another. Yes, because we're contributing to modifying habits, deep habits that are really enshrined in everyone's daily habits. The society model as a whole is changed. And there's a last example that I would like to give you, and Pierre will certainly follow up on this. When we adopt the model of the shareholding foundation, where we have a foundation that is the shareholder of the company, we renovate and we changes the governance model. When you're a shareholder, the foundation has an interest in having profits, because the dividends will finance projects of general interest. This is a model that we see in the Nordic countries, IKEA, Velux, Lego. They all have shareholding foundations to the tune of 25%, for instance. That goes to projects of general interest in Denmark, for instance. So we have a logic of alignment of interests. These are models where we have a convergence between private interest and environmental interest with a collective interest. And to go back to what you've started with, Vincent, at the dawn of a major election, which will open up a field of great uncertainties, and the fact that we are tempted to close the door and be by ourselves, we can see that there's the business world is getting more and more brutal against the backdrop of a more and more difficult world. So I think that corporate leaders have a responsibility. They need to show that at their scale, with their own actions, projects of common interest are still possible. This is a political responsibility of corporations. They need to innovate, to invest and shape new systems of general interest. Thank you. So you are actually inducing everyone to go further for the general interest. Cécile Lutner, I would like to know what you have to say about that. You are the general manager of L'Oréal France. It was a forerunner. It's in its own world, and it's also a micro-society. How can you see this micro-society evolve in a landscape that is so unstable, that is so difficult, that is so toxic sometimes as the one that we've known so far? Indeed, as a leader, we had this wake-up call. We know that we have a social responsibility with our co-workers because, as you said, our companies are micro-societies, and we have a responsibility towards the rest of the society, consumers, with the paths that we choose. More than ever, it's important to make it known by everyone. To go back to your question about our co-workers, it is true that we need them to commit. We need to meet their expectations. They're looking for purpose. We need them to be inclusive. We need to be inclusive in terms of generations, in terms of being for disabled people. Gender-wise, obviously, L'Oréal is doing a lot of work on that in a very tangible way. Gender parity was the first company acknowledged in France and the 9th worldwide on gender parity. As for disabled people, 6% of our co-workers have done their declaration and they have reported that they had a disability. So what's important for me is to go even more, to go even further. As for generations, a lot is at stake as well, because more than ever, there's a technological pace and nobody should drop out. Actually, it's also for this that we need to train 80% of our co-workers that are over 50, age of 50, they need to be trained to be in the game. And we're always listening to the new ways of working as to their quality of life, the capacity to set up very straightforward measures. We've decided not to have Monday morning meetings so that the co-workers can have a nice weekend and not to have the stress of Sunday night, and so that in the morning they can prepare their meetings and they can read their emails. So that's something that is quite simple. And as a micro-society, that we are actually designing and shaping a new society within our corporate world. And we need to be impactful on the society in the broadest meaning and via. Well, we know that environmental transition is a key element, and companies are major stakeholders. Maybe we should make it known much more. It's a deep conviction of ours, and one point on which the society calls upon us to do something. What is really important is to make sure that there's a balance between the purchasing power and environmental transition. This goal is really essential. We should maintain the balance, and we've seen it with tangible ways when we do eco-refills, for instance. When we listen to our consumers, it's nearly more important for it to be cost-effective than ecological, and I want it to be both, because we want to avoid having a part of the population that would just tune out of this, because, of course, it's very laudable for long term. As a company, we have to do it, but we can't deprive some of the consumers because for them this issue is too far off. So we need to reconcile objectives that can seem to be contradictory. The ecology on the one hand, the purchasing power on the other, they need to be not pitted against. We also need to make sure that there's inclusion. We've done a partnership with Emmaüs to make sure that we've opened 4 solidarity centers, for instance, with them, to make sure that via gift strategies that are given out to these centers, access to social and aesthetic care. We saw that it was important to give back self-esteem to some people and dignity, and these are some tangible examples of impact of a company on society. We think that is very important. Cécile Ricard? I hear all that you're doing, and we can imagine that it has a lot of, that it weighs in. There's a history, there's a track record on that, which is incredible. Don't you think that it is quite daunting when we see how many difficulties there are for the political world to shape a new society? What about this pressure that could be exerted on companies? And that could be daunting indeed. Can the company meet all these expectations on their shoulders? Isn't it too demanding to ask so much, more than they could provide? Saying, okay, they need to do things that we couldn't do otherwise because the political was creating goods, the social partnership were creating bonds, and it's no longer the case. Isn't it too heavy and cumbersome for the company, for the corporate world? I think we have to do it, and we have to make sure that people know what we're doing. We have to be very concrete. We have to remain humble. As for social rights, it's important to make people know the impact of the private sector on employment. L'Oréal, we're hiring 14,000, 15,000 people. But as for direct and indirect jobs, it's actually 94,000 jobs. It's a lot. It's important for people to know that and to be made aware of what is at stake from an economic point of view. It's also a protection with safeguards, and we make sure that we move the lines, and we have to remain ambitious in this context. More than ever, we have to keep safeguarding our values, because this is a mission that we have within the society. We need to be more educational. We need to make people understand what we're doing with the political world, with the general audience, but to be listening also to what it reveals. We have to make sure that segments of the population can have a different understanding of the world and society. Pierre Ferracci, you know the corporate world, you know. It's also a matter of balance of powers. It's a world where there are conflicts. You've dealt with social dialogues with different stakeholders, trade unions. Unfortunately, François Omril is not here today. He's sick. But this has agitated the trade union partners, and they've had a different strategy, and a quite brand new strategy. The CGT has called to vote for Front Populaire. CFDT has called to oppose the extreme right, and CGC is faithful to their tradition, and they would rather not intervene in the general debate. So we have a background that is a backdrop of situation which is quite unprecedented. How can the corporate world play a role in this situation, which is quite tense? Well, the matter of general interest, the state should be the safeguard of the general interest. But I've always been convinced that the corporate world should have general interest goals, and we've gone beyond what Mr. Freeman said. The obsession of a company, what is only at stake for a company is to make profit, to satisfy shareholders. We've overcome that. We've passed that. But with the approach of the environmental questions, but also with the social aspect, the corporate world is a forum of different stakeholders. I never thought that shareholders, customers, and co-workers should be in a conflict. They should not be pitted against one another. They should find some kind of cohesion. That's a place where collective negotiation is meaningful. When we have to say out loud the environmental challenges, to see how we can actually address them with the arrival of AI, nobody should left along the road. We should think that environmental transition creates supplementary, additional inequalities within the society. And there are also economic challenges because it's very costly. And the economy should be successful, should be looking up. Otherwise, we won't generate value and we won't be useful. How can the corporate world be useful to the political world to make sure that the general interests and the society's interests coincide? I see 3 or 4 elements in terms of contradictory challenges. The capacity to generate compromises. It's not a soft consensus. It's taking one step towards the other to find a common playing field. That's important. The corporate world is well positioned to say, well, the political world can't do it anymore, it seems. Well, right now they can't, but the corporate world could. They have the know-how, they have the right processes, and it's a mentality as well, it's a mindset. Well, sometimes they're drifting away. When you have a power that is too vertical, then it's no good. If I should refer to some recent challenges, we would need to understand it. Each company needs to combine this verticality because there is a hierarchy. You need to set a goal, and when there's no consensus, they need also to make a decision. But we need to have a horizontal kind of organizational chart as well. There are countries where social democracy weighs in more than here in France. The people is always right, ultimately. Well, actually, they settle. They are the ones deciding. We've seen it throughout history. But social democracy weighs in much more than here. So the political world should think about it. What is the scope and the remit of social partners in the professional world? There's there's a long way to go for this. There's a lot of corporate leaders that respect social partners and trade union organizations and paritarianism. Social dialogue is important. They know that sometimes we need to be smart. It's not easy. Each one has to make a step in the direction of the other. And sometimes we have to overcome hurdles along the way. Some companies can show the way. There's a third element. That means sharing value. I think that what is most important, we have to fight against poverty and inequalities, and this is what we should be doing. We need to be at the service of the planet, because reducing inequalities with a planet that would be unhealthy, it would be nonsensical. But the most important battle within society, within the political society, is sharing value. It's done in the corporate world, obviously. States do play a role in redistribution, but value sharing amongst for profit, this is something that is quite fundamental. And to go back to what Sophie said, there are transformations regarding shareholding interests that are very important. It's not only sharing it within the company, but also with those that are outside the company, and that would be in difficulty, that were underserved by national education, by lifelong learning, and I think that Alpha Group is earmarking a large portion of its turnover to a foundation and working on inequalities on the field of education, especially for the young ones, because this is where then we have disabilities that are difficult to cast aside. The corporate world has a role to play. I had some doubts, as Jean-Monique Genard was talking about it earlier. He knows it, about the raison d'être of a company. I understand that concept, but by definition, a company should affirm its DNA, its identity. That's a permanent objective. I thought that the raison d'être was not useful, but actually it is. Because throughout the life of the existence of a company, it helps to know what its DNA is, what its position and standing in the world is. And that's the same for the political world. And I'm fed up to see this matter of identity to be overused and exclusively used by those that call us to a vote. It's something deep. It's something radical. It's something that forces us to find a solution. And as for identity, it's immigration, it's how we look at inequalities. The corporate world needs to play a role on that. It's a way in which we have to install democracy within the corporate world. So the identity of a company is tantamount to helping and serving general interest, irrespective of the customers, the shareholders, and the co-workers. But for this, we shouldn't deny that sometimes interests could be antagonistic, and we need to strike the right balance between the dissenting interests so as to have growth in a smart way in compliance with the protection of the environment. But it will be costly, so we need to generate value, and we need to have a powerful economy to do so. That would carry also that value not only for the shareholders, the customers, and the co-workers. And I will wrap up on this. The difficulty to find the right articulation of these environmental, economic, and social challenges is also that there's a lot of decisions. Europe decides one thing, the nation-state decides another thing. Sometimes they interfere too much in the corporate world, for the better or worse. I'm not one of those that would think that the decrees have disrupted the social environment and improved the negotiations within the corporate world, because we need to have a balanced discussion. For this, we need to be on a level playing field, but there are decisions that are very difficult, and that makes things difficult.
Europe can be binding in terms of the environment. I think the same should apply to social issues. I think that Europe should be confident enough that the economy can be paired off with social questions. So we've got the social, economic, and environmental economies, which are all tied together. And sometimes we focus on one rather than two of the others, or two rather than the third. And so businesses are slightly unbalanced in terms of the balance of powers that you're talking about. I think that the social issue has to be the key to everything. The economy and protecting the planet must make people live better here on Earth and at home and in their workplaces. Because François Omeril isn't here, I'm not going to take the role of the unionist. However, let me come back on the third point, which pertains to the players involved in social dialogue in the company. The unions are also involved. Earlier we talked about the different forces pulling at society, the anger that's there. And they are part and parcel of society. What we see here in this rather idealistic landscape of constructing a compromise, do we have social partners who are ready to accept that? Or are they not moving to opposite sides and becoming more radical? Whilst participating in the political debate, we saw that the CGT has put forward candidates for this legislative election, and this too is something quite new. So, are our social partners ready to protect the general good? Well, one could ask the same question for the bosses. I believe that when we're talking about different parties voting, it's all very different, because history and the relationship with them and the workers and the unions are very, very different. If you take a look carefully at all of the unions, they have values that should transpire in the polling booth sooner or later. But there are some that are directing their members to vote for one party or against another party, and some are not giving any instructions at all. And the landscape is a bit more homogeneous than it has been in the past. I'm rather disturbed by this this form of protestation. I think that all union movements are conscious at the end of the day that you have to negotiate and admit and accept trade-offs. I think things haven't really changed with the decrees. The CGT signed about 80% of their agreements, and the other unions are at different levels. So there are some unions which will sign more, some less. And I think that compromise is natural for unions. And then there are good compromises and those that aren't so good. And it depends on the balance of power in the company. It depends on the company managers as well. when you take a look at the unions, you got to also take a look at the bosses. There are some who enjoy and are for negotiations. Others prefer a vertical chain of command. And I think that we all know that if we don't respect the unions today, we'll have people out on the streets for better and for worse. And I respect what the yellow vests were saying. And I think we have to find the correct relationship between company heads and unions, and you have to make sure that the workers are on board. We've got Stéphane Dedeyon with us, chairman of the board of the Banque Postale. And Stéphane, you too think that we need to find the right way to involve workers to constructing the business to the general good. Yeah, may I start by talking about something which may shock quite a few people. For me, there is no general good without individualism. Well, that's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Explain yourself. Well, if a business is not concerned with its own economic advantages, then it will not be profitable and it will not survive and it will not be able to carry out a mission and complete that mission within the given time frame. That's the first thing. So at the end of the day, would mean that a business coming face to face with general good takes place in what it does, its business, and in a performance equation that has to be profitable and useful. And if we want to work on these challenges, you have to work differently depending on whether you're looking outside, i.e. towards your clients, or inside towards your colleagues. If you start by, well, the fact they're two sides of the same coin. Let's talk about the first side, the inward gaze. So here we are in a society which is increasingly individualistic. It started after the Middle Ages. It speeded up after the French Revolution. And clearly it is an undercurrent trend. And so the business leaders have to harness that individualism to get economic power. And what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot construct anything without talent. And these talents, these skills, have to be orchestrated and organized so that they produce something which is bigger than themselves. And so that's the role of leadership. We're at the very heart of the job of any boss who's here in X. I'm convinced that the best way of running a company is to involve the individuals in the strategy, because that is the best way of making sure that they believe in the strategy, that they're committed to the strategy, because we are harnessing their desire to commit. And this requires managerial skills. It's not only, of course, there's a question of how you organize and manage, but it's a question of managerial posturing as also. If you constantly try to lower the decision-taking level closer to the field, if you do all of this and constantly encourage your employees to support the initiatives taken by their colleagues, then you will start to create things which are very possible. And we at the Banque Postale, we have defined our strategic perspectives to meet our objectives, and this involved 200 people working on the project. At CMP Insurance, we have a program to take the decision-making point of gravity further down the chain, as close to the field as possible. And this is an international company we're talking about, with 6,000 employees. So it is indeed possible to do it. Now, if I take a look at the outward gaze, well, the first thing we need is to have quality of the services and the goods that we propose at the fair price. If we haven't managed that, then our voice will not be heard anywhere. What I'm saying here is that the client is also individualistic. So I am convinced that the best advantage is a shared advantage, because all stakeholders in the business, the clients, the suppliers, society and NGOs, etc., if they feel that the company has individualized the creation of value to the point of only benefiting itself, well, then the business will become an asset which has no value and nobody wants it, and it will be pushed aside. Let's never forget that the value of something is always what other people think it is worth. So, to wrap up, I started by trying to provoke everyone by saying that without individualism there is no general good. The priority really remains to satisfy the general good. And it's not a matter of switching from individualism to the general good, but to free up the general good. So, and that begs the question of the legitimacy of leadership. For me, it cannot be founded simply on authority. It cannot be embodied by an ability to suggest a group project or individual interests that lead to inventing new ways of doing things, an ability to take initiatives, expanding to the level of the company. So every day I try to favour the medium and long terms, whereas everything's pressing us to favour the short term. I want to have decisions taken as close to the field as possible. I want to encourage managers to support initiatives rather than quash them. And it's important that we all have double sharing profit, but also sharing management, and applying these points are the best way to guarantee that we are satisfying the general good. And I think that this is the way that businesses can rise to that challenge, because people are no longer feeling that they are being listened to. They are taken for granted. Even if it's harder, more demanding, we can be a beacon. We can be a point of stability for people. We can create new levers for individuals to manage their environment better. And I think that would be a really good start. Well, public, private, there, I think we are talking about an awareness now, and we want to change the paradigm and commit to different ways of managing businesses and engaging in dialogue. It's all very interesting. So, Maya Noel, you're Managing Director of France Digital. This is a collection of young businesses with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, and you have a different mindset perhaps in your group. So here, is there more individualism in entrepreneurship? Is there a different way of broaching these subjects when you're talking about digital entrepreneurs and these younger entrepreneurs? Are they more committed to a transformation? Are they interested in transforming society? Given all that has been said hitherto, is the world that you represent any different? Well, I represent young businesses. We've got 20,000 startups in France, and most of them are about 5 years old. So we're at the beginning of the adventure. And so it's one of the drivers in our activities for over 3 years now. What with the BPI, we have been mapping out businesses which make an impact. What do we mean by that? Well, it's a business that, through its business model, has a direct impact linked to the SDGs. Nourishing the planet, teaching, and all the rest. And so we have a lot of startups that have been developed and which are going to change business models for the common good. Let me take the example of many businesses who work in healthcare, and they combat medical deserts thanks to apps which will be able to monitor patients remotely. There's Open Classroom, for example. During COVID, it enabled school children to continue learning. So this is part and parcel now of new vocations. And there's a landscape of 20,000 startups. We've got 1,000 in our group, and these are the units which are developing most quickly, encouraged by investment funds, which are focusing on environmental and social impacts. So it is a positive period of time now. These businesses are working for the general good, but it's also essential that they do so. I think it's essential in terms of competition. When you're talking about innovation, we are facing huge, giant players from the States, for example, and we don't necessarily have the same resources, particularly financial resources. So what do we do to attract talent when you don't have the huge budget of an American giant? Well, we focus on the mission and the philosophy of the business. We create a feeling of belonging to the business. We cultivate values that are that speak to the employees, because we don't have enough money to attract them and rely on money. So it really is a driver of competition. And startups are unique in they focus on employee shareholders. That really is important in development strategies. So there are all of these needs. We have to do this because that's the way we fend off our competition. And there are also regulatory necessities. Startups aren't directly concerned by CSRD, but by joining bigger groups with investors that have their own rules and regulations. They are often imposed to follow those rules, and that can be very, very difficult. And they crumble under the weight of all of these standards that they have to respect. It's very counterproductive. But this is, if they arrive to surf on this wave, we have some businesses that can comply by design to all of these new rules and regulations for the general good, the good of society, the good of environment and the planet. And this is a wonderful opportunity. And the final point that I would like to bring up is that we were founded in 2012. And our team value was to play as a team. We are an enterprise, an investment fund. We work collectively. And we really do need to play as a team, because a startup is always a tiny player that wants to break the status quo, and they can't ever do it on their own. So we, in our community of startups, we find ourselves with businesses which are rivals. They're business rivals, but we work together in order to take the industries forward, so that we can transform collective usages, because on the scale of a single enterprise you can't do it, but together we can. As a team, we can do it. French startups can work together. And it's important to note that in order to grow, they need clients, obviously. They need to open up to new markets. They need to integrate bigger groups. So we need to work all together on the French economy. But the right scale is the European scale. And this is an important message today. It's important to work as a team and to open up to foreign investors and foreign talents, because innovation cannot be created in a bubble. It has to be created openly in order to be efficient. It has to be universal. And to that end, it needs to be very inclusive. I'm not saying that all startups are virtuous models. No. There's a lot of gender equality, for example, but there are those companies that do innovate have included social diversity from the very outset, and it's all very cosmopolitan. Thank you very much, Maya, for having addressed this aspect. We've got a few minutes left. We can take 3 questions, if you like. I can see 2 hands that have already been raised. Kindly say who you are, and be very succinct in your question. Does anyone have a microphone there? Oh yes, someone's got the microphone there. Okay. There we go. The gentleman has a microphone, so off he goes. Thank you very much for the presentations. I am president of the Young Chamber of Economy here in Aix. I would like to broach a question which has not yet been addressed. Today, we have employees who want to commit to their region. And the role of a business in the general good includes their employees contributing to society. So the question is as follows. What are you putting in place to help your employees contributing to the region? Yeah, there's a second hand as well there on the 5th row, if I'm not mistaken. So the first question was the territories. Perhaps Stefan, that might be for you. And then there's a second question now. Hello, I work for Ecosphere, and I think the model for a commercial business in the social economy is something which you have created in terms of governance and sharing the value that you've created, but it goes even further than that, because a social enterprise has to dedicate over 50% of its profit to society rather than handing it out as dividends. So I've got a question. We have not yet mentioned duty. We've mentioned general good, but not the unbalance that exists between duty and rights. Given there's so much mistrust in society today, these duties are very informal, and they haven't been written down in black and white or chiseled in stone. Is there another hand being raised there with a question? Yes, there's a gentleman at the back who has a question. Let's see who you are, and let's hear your question. Hello. A question for Maya. Is open source a suggestion, for example? Is it a good solution for the environment? Does open source create the common good or contribute to the common good? Well, Stefan, would you like to start? Well, there's a very easy solution in terms of citizen commitment to their territories. We encourage our employees to take working days to go out and work for associations for different causes. They take it on their working time. It's part of agreement which we have signed, and we're very proud of that. Another thing, rights and duties. I'm obviously not going to talk about politics right here, but what can we do within the company? I believe that in a company, whether you like it or not, there is a social contract, and it's implicit or it's explicit. And the company commits and the employees commit to contribute to a shared project. I like this contract to be clarified, i.e., what autonomy am I given in my work? How can I be a player in the strategy of the business? Secondly, what's my career path going to look like? And third, what kind of recognition will I get? I think you have to be very, very clear on all three of those avenues, because that is the company's duty. Pierre Ferracci, I'd like to talk about this solidarity question. It's very, very important. Yes, of course, there are some questions being raised about sharing dividends, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy the notion of more commercial experience. A question of governance, shared more. I know certain aspects of this question. I'd come back to what Stefan was saying. Today, there's a huge need for recognizing the employees. I think governance has to change. Even in the social economy, and governance is two things. There's a debate in the field with the employees taken into account by the management, and individualization, although it may be synonymous with more autonomy, which can be a good thing, but there are many limits to that. But in the field, you have to listen to what the employees are saying, and you have to foster their initiatives. And moving on to governance, there are 13 countries in Europe out of 27. We could be the 14th, and it would be a majority, where 1/3 of the board members represent the employees or the unions. That's where key decisions are taken. So if we include employees in decision making, and not only in the works councils, that's where you comment a decision or you might correct it. Well, we would be making a huge step forward on all fronts. I'm not sure that we've got time for any more answers. We'll do what we can quickly, and then we must conclude. Okay, open source, that was one of the questions. Yes, open source is a way of moving forward more quickly. We need to have a society which is more open. So it's great to pool resources, and that will help us to be more efficient and speedier in our innovation. So Natalie, you've got a couple of minutes if you could wrap up. So we have seen that it is possible to reconcile private interests and the general good. We've seen that businesses can come up with new business models. We've talked about different ways. We talked about more recognition and to satisfying the hopes of the employees, leadership being closer to the ground, and a business is need to compromise, and once that happens, then then the sky's the limit. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you to the audience for being here.
bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aude Pombray. I'm a teacher in economics at Haut Mont Blanc and dealing with strategy. The barometer DNSA of 2023 has stated that 1 in 3 Frenchmen was willing and in favor of the construction of new nuclear factories. We also have the taxonomy that decided to have nuclear power in the green energies. It seems that all conditions are met to have a debate, a real reflection, a real economic reflection on nuclear energy and the alternative solutions to nuclear energy and nuclear power. If we listen to those that are in favor of nuclear power, what are the arguments that are going to be raised? If we say that it's not emitting any CO2, for instance, and that it would allow to have energy independence that's highly desired by the French people. We've had a survey, IFOP and RTE, that show that. So the partisans of nuclear power say we have energy independence, there's no emission of CO2, we should go towards nuclear power. Those that are against, they say that it's very costly. And it's true that if we see Femmes en Ville, if we see how much it costs to process the radioactive waste, we could think about it. It costs very much. But also, if we take into account the fact that we have potentially some safety problems that may not be that serious, but we saw that we could have maintenance problems with nuclear power. So those that are against would say, let's not think about it further. It costs too much. There are safety issues that could occur on top of that. So it's obvious we shouldn't go for nuclear power enhancement. So what is lacking is an economic reflection to weigh them out, to see what's the cost and benefit ratio between all these arguments to decide whether or not it's a good thing to have nuclear power. And actually, it's more complicated than that, because we shouldn't consider nuclear power on its own, saying it's no good or it's good. We should actually talk about alternative solutions. We agree, not emitting CO2, it is mandatory. So we would eliminate any type of other alternatives. It's solutions. There would be only renewable energies. And we wondered about the optimal mix of energies between nuclear power that I just described and renewable energies, which is very attractive. However, probably we'll have to think in details about that to see the consequences for the biodiversity or in terms of use of critical materials. Once we've done this overview and we've looked at the ins and outs of everything, we'll have a reflection that is very complicated. But in my opinion, it's hard to do savings. We have to reconcile energy mix. But I'm delighted to be able to debate this with the wonderful guests that we have on this stage today. Thank you, Aude. Hello, everyone. In 2 seconds, I will introduce the speakers of today. We're lucky to have a panel that is really at the heart of the current news, not especially for the recent campaign. We talk a lot about energy in terms of pricing, so it would be interesting to go back to that today. I raised a question. If we really want to go towards a reconciliation of energy choices, we will have the opportunity to explore that in our discussions. And I would like to introduce the speakers that may say a few words on their field of expertise. We have Xavier Barbaro, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Neoen, Laurent Germain, who's the CEO of Aegis, Nicolas Monti, CEO of Edison, and Flora Gebali, who is the President of Coalitions and the author of a book called Le Syndrome de la Phobie. You have the floor, Xavier. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Aude. I'm not into nuclear, but I will not take the position of being against nuclear power because that would not correspond. We do renewable energy, solar, wind power, storage. We do it in France, in other countries, in Australia, in Finland, in Canada, in Argentina. It's quite interesting, actually, because it gives us an observation post about what's happening elsewhere abroad. Sometimes things go less well than in France, and there is a lack of consensus somewhere. There are energy choices that are difficult to reconcile in France, but it's also the case elsewhere. In Calgary, for instance, in the province of Alberta in Canada, on the road to the airport, there were big boards where it said, "I love oil and gas," which was a way to take a standing against Trudeau, the first federal minister who was standing against this. And also, for some, coal would be tantamount to hitting on nuclear power. We meet this everywhere, but this has been exacerbated in France over the last weeks and months. It is an interesting subject. It is an important subject, and the population and political decision makers should take an interest in it. However, we should go towards reconciliation because energy projects take time to develop. A solar project is 5 years, wind farm is 10, and nuclear power is 15. So then afterwards it would be operated up to 80 years. So the choices that we make will commit us, will bind us for our children, will bind our children and grandchildren. So we need to converge because it costs a lot of money. It's important, and our decisions will have an impact over the long term. And as a nation, as a continent, we need to know where we want to go. It concerns also our neighbors because there's a link which is not that of a country, which is probably that of a continent because there are interconnections, there are energy markets that we share, and we should avoid chaos. Just to set the scene of the value of renewable energies that are embodied today, and for the session, we have renewable electrons that are intermittent. We have batteries that are not very costly. Solar, wind farm. Unanimously, it is acknowledged as the less costly source of energy in Europe, less than nuclear power. We can have important volumes with green electrons at a low cost, intensive ones. In Neoen, we provide electricity to Google, to SNCF, to other energy suppliers into the tune of 40, 60 euros per gigawatt hour. These are the prices that EDF can try to sell the electron-intensive energies. That's public information. This is 110 euros. So it's important to have this figure in mind to start with. And the energy that we produce benefits in a strong way because it's local. It's not imported. And when we import Chinese equipment, American, facilities will produce made in France energy, so it creates sovereignty. Even if we have foreign facilities, we have to bear in mind that it generates interesting income for the farmers, for the communities of communes, for our outsourcers, for solar energy. Even with 100% of Chinese panels, we have energy produced for Bouygues and so on. That's the debate and the scene as it should be set. Renewable energy doesn't cost a lot of money. It's important volumes at the right time. We couldn't have overcome the crisis of winter 22-23 without wind farms because it generated a lot of electricity at the right time. And it's an energy and electricity that has a local and French component that is quite strong. That's the scene. It doesn't make us adverse to nuclear power, but it can be built quite quickly. So the permitting goes a long way, but it's done in 6 to 12 months, which is also an important element to keep in mind. Thank you, Xavier. Laurent? I think that the title of this session is quite paradoxical because with RTE, there was a publication in February 2022. It was like a peace treaty between nuclear energy and renewable energies, because if we want to be at a carbon-free, we want to meet the expectations in terms of carbon-free society, we have to work on nuclear power and renewable energies. We shouldn't pit them against one another. And I think that this objectivization has pacified the debate and has made sure that this was reinforced by sovereignty issue in terms of energy that arose in a strong manner over the last years. And this has supported the central scenario of RTE, which is it's a crystal clear project, namely to have 6 EPR and 8 new in a quick manner, with having one in Upperly by 2035, and also to multiply wind farms to have 4,000 of them in the same horizon, and also to multiply by 7 the volume of solar panels. So the reconciliation of energy mix has taken place. I don't think that it is that we should wage a new war on that subject. But then, between nuclear power and renewable energies, we are not talking about the same reaction. We have a real French excellence that we can export, where we can create jobs relating to that French expertise. And the first World Summit on Energy that took place in March 2024 forecasted a growth of energy, of nuclear energy, by threefold. And that allows France to position itself to create jobs and to create also a nuclear industry in France, and to have an impact, and we'll talk about it, on the pricing of energy. Thank you. Nicolas?
To everybody. I'll try to give you a picture of how we see the energy transition from Italy. So the Italian perspective and the Italian market, the energy market is very much different from the French one. Realizing that the energy transition is much more complicated than what was envisaged at the beginning. So it's not simply the fact of creating incentives and regulations to invest in renewables, because renewables are not enough. They are giving a great contribution to decarbonization, but they are interruptible. And our energy system is not ready to absorb an heavy portion of renewables intermittents into the system without additional investments, for instance, in energy storage. So we have a plan in Italy to more than double renewables that currently are installed, but the plan at 2030 was not combined with the plan to associate storage investments. Storage are batteries, storage are pump and storage plants. So besides the fact that we need storage, we also need to address new investment in order to give somehow a return to the domestic industry. So running huge investments, and Italy has to invest from here to the end of the decade 350 billion euros for the energy transition. I think France is probably in a similar situation, and I'm not talking about nuclear, because we have opened the debate on return on nuclear in Italy, but there is something happening for the next decade. So we have realized the complication and also the difference in which the different countries are managing the energy transition. If I see at electricity spot prices in Europe today, Italy has a spot price of 110 euro per megawatt hour, France 30. But these 30 euro per megawatt hour in France, the right price to give the right signal to allow investments in new nuclear capacity or even in new renewable capacity or in storage capacity? No, it is not. If I look at the situation in Spain, prices are going to zero, spot prices, for a certain number of hours during the day, because there's an excess capacity of PV production, and the country has not invested enough in energy storage. Is it the right market model? It is not. I can make another example of Germany. A month ago in Germany, for 2 days, spot prices went up to 9,999 euro per megawatt hour, because there was an unfortunate event in which there was no sun and no wind for a couple of days and was not predicted. So is it the right signal to the market? They have burned hundreds of millions in a couple of days. So again, different marketplaces, different regulations. We need a direction and a better planning from Europe in order to run in a sustainable way the energy transition, and we are pretty far from that.
Thanks very much. Et Flora? Bonjour à toutes et tous.
Hello, everyone. If reconciliation of energy mix has been talked about in the RTE report, it hasn't been known by the French public. Many of them is opposed to nuclear power. There are political powers that have not found reconciliation on the subject matter of energy. Energy reconciliation could work, in my opinion, if we get out of the binary debate, which is for or against nuclear power. Whatever position we take, the impression is that we are for or against when there are obvious arguments on both sides. The German model was an argument against those that are adverse to nuclear power, for instance, that would undermine this position. But if we have a more global overview of the protection of the environment, we could see also the problems relating to water. It takes up 1/3 of of fresh water in France. And also, what about the slowness of energy transition? We need 10 to 20 years to build a nuclear power plant. And we would need to have 1 reactor per week for 30 years if we are to be autonomous. So if we can't get out of this debate for or against nuclear power, I don't think that we could reach an energy reconciliation standing. Another thing also is that reconciliation in terms of energy cannot work if we do not have an ecological reconciliation today. There is something that is quite practical. It's actually the carbon footprint, where companies could seize themselves of the subject because it could get into spreadsheets. It's quite reducing in terms of scope on ecology, because when we are in favor of nuclear power, we don't often hear about water, but water is one of the biggest issues and is going to be the subject matter of a huge crisis looming upon us. And then also, how about biodiversity? The energy issue can only be solved if we do changes that are not technical, but are rather cultural. And it is difficult to hear. And the carbon footprint, which is easy to resort to, but it can be also an undermining factor because it's unsatisfactory. I talked about the end syndrome, because if we don't change the way in which we work, we will not manage to solve this ecological question. And the way in which we address the energy question nowadays, that actually resonates to the codes of the industrial economy era codes. Another way to find reconciliation is to accept that the energy issue is just a small part of the ecological question, which is rather holistic. It needs to be taken as a whole, and it requires from us to change, to require as individuals, as a society, to have a cultural change. And shouldn't we not do that, we would look at it from the prism of the industry, and we would only see the tree instead of the whole forest. And what also is very important by far, in my opinion, energy reconciliation could not occur without political reconciliation. For 20 years, Zygmunt Bauman has made a theory on the liquid society. Liquid society is where we believe in everything and nothing. There's a lot of lack of safety that is growing. There's an instability of models. We change opinions, we change regulations, we change culture, we change opinion. And we have seen how energy transition is the victim of this liquid society. And we can see how this lack of safety due to the liquid society leads to political arguments that are there to reassure the population without having solutions that are tangible on ecology and relevant. When Pompidou and Mesmer in the 70s set up the nuclear strategy that is still the energy model today, there's no Twitter at the time. And it changed everything. And also, when we looked into the Le Monde newspaper archives, we see all this construction of this energy strategy, how it covers the debate. It's one time a day. We can debate at every minute of the day on this subject now with Le Monde, and it's also expert journalists that, as time flies, they can give arguments to the population so that they can make their own minds. Here we have a liquid society where we have hyper-information with the social networks, with everything. And that participates to a liquidity of political action where we cannot build a model of energy planification. Energy planification is a mix. It's a reconciliation. I will wrap up like this. That's energy mix. We should know what we have to keep with the nuclear power that we have and how we can develop for the future, because there's something in which I don't believe. That's the notion of transition. Transition, I don't know what it means. However, supply on an economic market that would be supported by Europe and with having a functional effect on companies could work. I'll wrap up quickly. I imagine that there's a lot of publicists here that have this talent to talk about, to have a narrative around energy. We should never dissociate nuclear power from sobriety, from frugality. It doesn't mean that we should become Hamishes. It means that we should know how to approach energy in the 20th century. Thank you to all of you. I would like to go back to these controversies on nuclear power, and I was struck by what Laurent said, who talked about a peace treaty. That's a consensus which, according to you, arose. What does it mean for you? Because we're still at the heart of a debate. We have nuclear power, but it's quite recent. We don't know if it's going to be sustainable, if the foundations have been laid for this. Why are you saying this? Well, the strategy that has been set up and rolled out, the 6 EPRs, they are actually seeing light now. There are studies that are being carried out as we speak. And there's a timing of achievement of the nuclear plants that is clear, with a commissioning in 2035, because, as Florence has said, the idea is not to reinvent the wheel and not to redo against the same thing. The price of electricity is closely linked to the speed of execution of these plants. And if we do it in 70 months instead of 120 months, that will change. The industrial organization will change to have EPRs in a short duration of time. And also a lot of replicability, because this is how we can decrease the cost of the future plants. And in terms of renewable energies, the vote on the speeding up of renewable energies was done in 2023. And from my viewpoint, it did not generate any revolt, any rebellion from the French people. So the lack of competition between renewable energies and nuclear power is going on, is taking place, and we should applaud that. And we should not question the strategy, because what creates something, a debate that would be not productive, is to change strategy every 3 days. So the strategy is crystal clear. It is based on facts that are very robust, and we just need to roll out the strategy and not question it anymore.
Quels ingrédients est-ce qu'il nous faut pour ça? Est-ce qu'il nous faut...
What ingredients do we need? Do we need political stability within France, but also the European fora? I'm asking the question also to your colleagues. I think that everybody wants to have more stability so that the foundations are healthy and we can have a reconciliation in terms of choices. Nuclear power was no debate before, and then it started to be controversial. We closed Fessenheim, and then we saw that we needed nuclear power sovereignty and energy sovereignty, and it was actually very puzzling. I've been in the wind farm industry sector for quite some time. I was told at one point that they had to be regrouped, and then I was told that they needed to be scattered away, and there's a stop-and-go tendency which is really upsetting. We've seen the harmful effects of what we've known in France, which with the speeding up of renewable energies. What we want to say to the state is they should interfere less in energy policy, because every time it's like an elephant in the room. We lose time, we waste time. We need alignment. We need something that is more straightforward and more consistent. I'm not saying that this subject is easy. We shouldn't oversimplify. It is complicated indeed. But we live in a world, to use Flora's words, where the state brings more liquidity in the wrong sense of the word, when we need consistency. We have the right ingredients. Let's talk about what is positive. We have the know-how. We have a good level of acceptability. 50% of people are in favor of nuclear power. I don't know if they're ready to have it nearby their homes, but there's always this syndrome where they say, not in my garden, especially for wind farms, for solar panels, for nuclear power. But people understand that we're going towards a more electric world where we need to be sovereign in our energy supply. We've seen what has happened with Russia and Ukraine. And there's also the fact that we're more acquainted, we're more familiar with wind farms and solar panels. It's more accepted. So the know-how and the acceptance and the capitals and the space, because we have enough room to have facilities, that means that we can have a high-quality energy mix. And that means that's an ingredient for sovereignty, but also to become competitive and to be resilient as well. Because in certain way, nuclear power doesn't always work perfectly sometimes. And we've seen it during winter 2022, where half of the park is decommissioned, it's out of service, it doesn't work. Depends on demand. In France, we have hydropower. So that actually helps us as well. But in France, we can have more nuclear power, more renewable energies, more energy independence, the capacity to accept additional investments as well, because we have data center that will mushroom as well. So we have the right setup. We have the right launch pad for this. But we need to make sure that the political decision makers are in the equation as well, because they are the ones that sometimes make sure that we have a liquid society and have a stop-and-go policy when we need consistency. So we need some institutional foundations, but there's also an institutional stability. We talked about organic. We said, is organic good for us? It's YouTube is the television for those under 40 years. They don't watch the standard TV anymore. In the first 3 videos that the search engine would offer, there were fake news. So I imagine that today it's the same, because with this liquidity, things change so much that wind farm has bad reputation, then very good reputation. We talk about offshore wind farms. It moves, it changes so quickly. There's a lot of fake news inside. There's a matter of stability as to information, but there's also the question of stability, of economic stability, because I'm sorry, but today it is at the very heart of society, not because we have debates on technical questions, but because French people debate because they have nothing to have heating for. We need to heat themselves. 10 to 15% of French people would lower the heating by to 15 degrees during the winter, and they find it hard to pay their bills. Today, irrespective of the crisis that we need to address, be it an energy crisis, the school, the hospital crisis, we reach the same outcome. That's actually an explosion of inequalities. And if we can't solve the crisis as a whole, look at it as a whole, we will never solve anything, and we will continue to have institutional instability, such that we offer governance going in one direction and then another direction, where we have a liquid society where we don't move forward with the climate crisis that we know. So if we don't decrease the inequalities, we will not be able to solve the political crisis, because it remains a macro issue. The politics is all about how can we live together.
Well, Nicola, I think you wanted to say something, or Aude? And then after that, we can perhaps look at beyond the French borders. Yeah, I wanted to come back on the consequences for inequality. If we don't have acceptability, there will be no energy transition. That really is a hurdle. And we have to guarantee acceptability if we hope to do anything. But that does not mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can consider that a carbon footprint, it might be is necessary but not enough, and it enables us to quantify our carbon emissions so that businesses can then put a price on carbon, and then we can help them to internalize the cost. And it would be even better if we had a carbon tax. That means that you pay exactly what you should. We've also got many initiatives that are focusing on ecology. We're starting now to see that biodiversity is the new climate. And in the public arena, we see zero net soil artificialization, which is being recognized there. So that's a constraint which exists here in France. And there's that debate, which is up and running. And businesses are also taking into account, when they can, well, some of them do anyway, in their treble accounting system. So what is the next phase? I think we're trying to... We realize that the climate isn't the only thing. There's a lot of interaction between biodiversity and climate. My final point is that, yes, cultural change would be very practical, in fact. So if we all think differently and spontaneously we're internalizing all of our externalizations, that would be really great. But the question is, how can we achieve that? For the time being, we're trying to take steps. They're not big enough, but there's no reason. If we leave individuals without guiding them, if we allow them provide a carbon tax and then develop that for biodiversity or other aspects of ecology, there's no reason why this cultural change will not take place. It would be great. We really do need policies. We need politics. We need strategies so that the strategy can take place. Thank you very much. Nicolas, did you want to say something? Yeah, I agree that strategy is very important. But as far as nuclear power is concerned, and in Italy, we have a stable government, which is good news for European politics. But we recently reopened that nuclear debate in Italy. It's the first time for 40 years. And so we have already got some renewable production, 40% today of renewables. The rest, 60%, is generated by gas. So to decarbonize it between now and 2050, that's very important. So what technologies are going to allow that? What's an alternative to gas? Today we've got nuclear energy. The other condition for returning to nuclear energy in Italy is, of course, to use existing industrial rights, which are coal plants, which are due to be closed in a few years' time, and also we've got a gas power station, which has another 20 years to live. So, which technologies can be used on those sites? 15 hectares of ground. It can't be the big EPR nuclear stations, but smaller stations, modular reactors that are 300, 400 megawatts in size, because the real question for us is acceptability. That means converting industrial sites using nuclear technologies. So that is at the heart of the debate for us in Italy. However, the government has got a long-term plan for national energy. We need a long-term energy plan. For the time being, up until now, Italy did not have one because every year we had a different government. But now we've got a stable government that has committed to identify a long-term energy strategy, and the strategy foresees 10%, in fact 20% of programmable renewable energy, and half of that, i.e. 10%, is identified as being nuclear energy. The rest could be gas with CO2 capturing. So this would enable us to do this, technically speaking, and we would have reduced carbon energy. We've talked about stability being one of the key ingredients to move forward. We haven't really talked about financial capacity in that sector of industry. Human resources also. So are these components that you might be worried about for the future? So it's all very well deciding you want to take that path, but then you'll need finance and staffing levels, wouldn't you, as well? Well, if I could just come back first of all to that question of acceptability before we leave it. The reasons why political decisions have been taken in France and are accepted here is because we are not planning to open new nuclear sites. The next EPRs will be constructed on existing sites. And I think that was a political decision taken by the president, and that managed to calm down the debate of getting back into nuclear energy. Now, the conditions necessary for success. First of all, we have to make this industry attractive again to students. We want the number of engineers in nuclear engineering to increase, and that is going to happen. We're not there yet, however. I know that a lot of engineering schools and universities today are boosting their technology, their nuclear technology diplomas, and then businesses are ready to contribute to this effort as well, so that human beings are up to the challenge. Now, talking about finance, an EPR costs about 10 billion. 10 billion for an infrastructure that will live for at least 60 years. So I think in economic terms, it's a very positive effect on the economy. During COVID, we spent 100 billion, just to give you some perspective there. Nuclear is expensive, people say, but if you compare it with the positive aspects in terms of the cost of energy and structuring an industry and export, etc., I think the price-quality ratio is rather attractive. Xavier? At Neon, we do things a little bit differently. Our projects aren't as complex as what we've been talking about. We have powerful units that employ only 4 people, so we do need to recruit people, but the challenges are not as high as in Laurent's company. In terms of workforce, we've got about 10 or so people, and that's enough to satisfy our roadmap. But of course, it's a key subject for us. Like everybody, we want to have the right people in the right jobs. And so it's important to recruit and to have a good visibility. In terms of financial capacity, as I was saying earlier on, our sector, and at Neon in particular, we're not short of capital, and it's absolutely true because we're changing our main shareholder now. And we will be headed by Brookfield, which is an important backer. But the billions that Neon has already invested, even for a company such as ours, which was a small enterprise and then a small industry, this is a great subject, and we found backers, we found people who would lend money to us because it's an asset that is recognized as something which works well. We haven't had any trip-ups along the way, and we're heading in the right direction as far as society and the environment is concerned. So when you take a look today in France, the thing that's not moving forward are these authorizations. It's the administrative machinery which is too slow. And I don't mean to throw stones at anyone else that works for the government there, but the instructions change all the time, and so we are not short of expertise, we are not short of manpower, we are not short of all the rest. What we are lacking is a legal framework, and that's the sad thing. In France, we could do so much more. I think that we're in a climate which is accepting of nuclear energy now. There are some projects which have been blocked for good reason, but sometimes they are blocked for the wrong reasons. But and that's a real shame because we could all benefit. Could Europe step in? Nicolas. Yeah, I agree 100%. We do need regulatory stability. We need Europe to take into consideration all of the technologies that will reduce carbon footprints and be good for competitivity. A private company cannot fund a project that will be amortized 50 years down the line. That's just not possible. We need to have a regulatory framework with prices that are guaranteed by the state that will enable us to get long-term investment in nuclear power. The same thing for the development of all renewables. We need visibility in the medium and long terms of price. We are used today of having an electric system which works on the basis of variable prices and variable costs of the production of electricity, which today is determined by gas. Today, in Europe, prices there are no variable costs. The costs are all fixed, and so we are heading towards a world, an energy world, which will be increasingly regulated. And Europe there has a basic, fundamental role to play there. Flora, you wanted to chime in here. Yeah, consensus on the theme of institutional positivity. So the right question could be, how do we get stability in the institutions? As you know, this Green Deal that was signed in 2019 was totally unknown to most of the French population. However, it's so vital to Europe. And it was a real achievement because 27 countries came to an agreement about their roadmap. That was some challenge, and it was pulled off. It was the first time, really. There was less than 1% of the French population that knew that the Green Deal actually existed. And they found out it existed, here in France at least, and it would be interesting to know what it was like in Italy. They found out about it during the European election campaign, and they learnt about it from people who were pointing the finger at the Green Deal, saying that we should get out of that. However, today, when you're wondering about how to bring about this cultural change, you do it with political leadership. And today's political leadership is nourished by institutional liquidity. So the politicians today wouldn't find any advantage to have this stability there. And that's why I say, I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, this is why I'm saying that this crisis is so deep. I'm not pessimistic at all. I would like to reiterate that the reconciliation in France of these energy sources has taken place in France, and it will be a win-win situation. I think this reconciliation took place in Europe also, and the proof of that is that at the beginning of 2024, there was an allegiance that was baptized between 11 countries. Not everybody agrees. Out of the 27, there are only 11 who've entered this nuclear alliance, but the others have allowed 11 countries to move forward on a joint nuclear strategy. That is proof of reconciliation. And the fact that this also went hand in hand with nuclear technology being considered as strategic by the European Union and in the European taxonomy, nuclear energy is an energy of transition. Well, this is all very concrete and very positive and encouraging. And sustainable? Yeah, totally. Because the majority at the European Parliament of the last 5 years, it was approved by European elections. So yes, I think that 5-year period to come will crown this stability and the implementation of choices in Europe that correspond perfectly to choices that different states are making in their respective jurisdictions. So I think we may have lost 3 or 4 years to arrive at this final conversation and get the taxonomy sorted out. I'd like to comment on Europe. I think Europe has a lot to contribute to regulations, but also in education. And I was sorry to see in 2022-2023 that Europe was a bit too much of an interventionist in terms of France. It was important at the time that people's bills didn't go through the roof, and I thought it was really saddening to see that in France we've got this energy shield. We were saying to people, don't worry, we'll put a cap on prices, but without explaining how it was happening. In countries such as Germany, people saw the real cost of energy, and the state sent out a check to compensate for the increase. So I think that's very revealing of the situation that we're all facing. France, of course, could protect its populations, of course, but it was rather saddening to note that in the French people's minds, they were saying, oh, well, energy's cost the same as it used to. Well, in fact, it was 100 billion euros that was spent to compensate. And a lot of money was taken to that end. So I would have liked Europe to have stepped in a little bit more and to tell France to do what Germany was doing, to explain to the population how energy is priced, what goes into the price, and explain where the money comes from, either from public finance or net contributors, which were renewable energies. I think that was a shame not to have explained that situation. Aude and Flora both want to chime in. I'd just like to come back very, very quickly, and then perhaps Aude, you could also speak. How do we reconcile people with the notion that energy is going to be more expensive? Because that's the message we're starting to hear now. And it's at the heart of the election campaign here in France. Let's mention that in your answers. Well, my answer is to do with the question that these signals are being sent out in terms of price. People can adjust as needed and see how we're going to see more and need more electricity. So you're going to have to adjust so that you don't buy stuff that is going to lose value overnight. You have to buy the right equipment at the right time. And if we had understood these signals during the Ukrainian crisis, that would have enabled households to start adjusting rather than receiving that signal which said, well, no matter what happens in the future, even if in the worst case scenario, whatever happens, you will always have the state who will be here to guarantee you energy, i.e. gas, energy that will be cheap and that you will always be able to afford. I think German households were paying the same as French households, although their energy was much more expensive. So that means, as Aude has said, they had learned how to invest in heat pumps and other energy efficient devices. And in France, we haven't yet learnt that, which is a bit of a shame. Right now, there's a debate about should we decrease VAT on energy in France. I think you should address the situation differently, and it kind of hides the fact that renewables are deflationist. We need to reduce the cost of energy with wind turbines and solar panels. It's a shame that it's not integrated by the politicians because we have to realize that subsidies cost a lot of money. Let's tell those politicians that subsidies cost a lot of money. An EPR will cost 100 euros by a megawatt hour, which will increase prices, but renewables, you can't have a 100% mix. You have a proportion in there. We'll have an intelligent mix. And if we manage to encourage people to be a bit more frugal, it's not going to deliver efficiency, but it will be cost saving. But people need to be conscious of prices, they need to act in the right way, and they need to receive the right signals to know the reality. I'm fearful that there's not going to be enough time for questions from the room. Are there any hands going up there? Yes, there's a lady there at the back of the room wearing red, and then there's a second question which we can perhaps also take. Hello. I'm in the 21 committee. and I've been working on this subject for a long time. I would just like to say something, excuse me, this isn't a question, but I've heard things said up there on the stage which are not accurate, despite the quality of the speakers. Yes, it seems that there is some kind of consensus because we're not in the nitty-gritty of the subject. We've not started to construct these nuclear plants. You're right to say that they are going to be on land on which power plants already stood. However, let's wait and see. Second point, when you are talking about taxonomy in Europe, it's true that it has been accepted that nuclear is a transition energy, but you know, and I need not say much more about it, that this has been a discussion between several countries, Austria and Germany in particular, and France had to make a lot of concessions on subjects which we weren't expecting. Thirdly, when you say that nuclear energy, and I'm not against nuclear energy, I really want to underline that, but with global warming, I think we're going to have 40 more years of nuclear energy, but not 300 more years. When you say that it's a stable energy, all you need is Putin to misaim his missile, and you've got another Chernobyl on your hands. And it's not totally unimaginable, as you know. So if there is consensus at the moment, it's because we've been battered around the head about this subject, and there's been an absolutely mind-boggling commission at the National Assembly here in France, where the MPs asked the entire world, i.e. 4 prime ministers, 2 presidents, all kinds of experts, they have to be in that committee. And if at the end of that committee, if we had renewed the governments a little bit, we would have been better off. So I think we ought to be more nuanced. I think that in coming years in Europe, we will be behind in terms of renewables. We're already behind, actually. And in the landscape, the energy landscape, we are behind here in lands. I'm for a mix. I think we really do have to include nuclear energy. But if we don't, we will lose our expertise here. And my final thing I want to say, an apology for hogging the mic here, but oh, okay, no, that's it. I'll stop there. Well, I agree with everything you've said. We should have invited you onto the panel. There's another question there. There's a lady wearing blue. It's perhaps. Oh no, we want a question. I know the story of this energy station. I've studied the energy industry. The fact that it hasn't yet exploded, it's the most important, the most modern one in Europe, but it hasn't blown up yet. Because after Chernobyl, we thought about it carefully. And with everything that's happening today, which hasn't yet exploded, I think that proves that if you use nuclear energy correctly, you'll even be able to resist and withstand Putin. Well, thank you very much for contributing that. Well, bombs perhaps, but what about cyber attacks? I'm not so sure about that. Have we got a final question from the floor for our speakers? There's a lady in white.
Thank you. I'm a normal citizen. In nuclear power, but I have a question too, but I also would like to share with you a small, short case. I'm from Finland, and in 2005, Finland started its latest nuclear power plant project with Areva, a French nuclear power plant company. And it was meant to be completed in 2009, but it was delayed, it was complicated, so it was completed 13 years delayed. We only took it in use last year, and it costed 8 billion euros to Areva, and I have to thank everyone here because we were told that French citizens, taxpayers, paid a big part of that money. So thank you for the nuclear power plant. And the second, my question is about, you haven't talked at all about the final disposal of the nuclear waste.
Good question, because we were meant to ask it and we did not.
Yeah, and in Finland, actually, we as the third in the world, we have now started this process, and I'm a member of the family business and we are involved in, so I'm a little bit informed of that. So are you trusting Finnish bedrock for your nuclear waste? Because now it's pending.
Thank you very much. En une minute, parce qu'on a atteint notre temps de...
We've just got 1 more minute. Aude, I think this is your specialist field, but anyone else feel free to contribute. Yeah, Finland and Sweden are trailblazers in terms of burying nuclear waste. France is also up in the front runners. We've got a site in Bure which is undergoing construction, or we're asking for a permit. And the construction will be until 2027, and the pilot industrial phase will be around 2027. There is a solution exists to work with existing nuclear waste, i.e. not which is being currently created. We could talk about energy for a whole lifetime. Thank you very much to the audience for being here, and thank you very much to our panel members as well. Enjoy the end of the meeting.